Thank you for the patience. Shashank Maniji, I would now like to request you to come and address the gathering with your keynote speech.
Thank you very much. आप सभी लोगों को बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, especially CSBC, Pavan ji, and not least Shipra, who also happens to be my elder sister, so I can never refuse any request of hers. And also those people who are gathered on the stage for this very auspicious gathering, where I think a very important subject for the future of humanity is going to be discussed. I do want to thank Kailash ji, Sharon ji, and Subhashis ji for being here with me on the stage. And what I hope to do in the next few minutes is to take you through 5 themes. First is I'd like to introduce you to a different philosophy which should be guiding how we should look at this world. When you talk about behavior change, when you talk about AI, when you talk about economics. Second, I'd like to talk specifically about what I call humanist economics, which underpins my belief in humanist AI. Third, I'd like to talk about humanist AI itself, in short. Fourth, I'd like to talk about what I'm calling the Banyan Revolution, which is how we must make human-centric development at the core of Viksit Bharat. And fifth, I'd like to invite you to this Abhiyan so that many of you can come to my constituency where the first seeds of this revolution are being born. And many of you can travel on Jagrati Yatra, which is a train journey which has been going for the last 20 years, almost 18 years, and for which at the end of the Q&A session, and I will have a Q&A session, we can then do a 90-second small film by award-winning filmmaker on the Jagrati Yatra. So with those words, I want to say that it's fair to say, and I've just returned from a 2-week trip to the United States. I'm part of the Indo-US Parliamentary Group. कि आज की तारीख में हम लोग एक बहुत बड़े जोखिम के विषय से गुजर रहे हैं. We are going through a very big polycrisis. That polycrisis is that of social inequity and, may I say, lack of coherence, economic inequality, environment as a big way. And just when we needed each other to solve the problems of this world together, there are national boundaries which are hardening. But at the same time, if you look at our country, this country which is now the largest nation on this planet, which has more than 1.4 billion people, then we also have a number of opportunities. We shouldn't look at this only as a polycrisis. We must look at this as an opportunity where under the leadership of our Prime Minister, we have created a 22-year forward-looking vision, 25 years since 15th August 2022. We have 18 general elections. I was part of the last general elections, where I can tell you that is a very free and fair election. Our macroeconomy is doing extraordinarily well for a time where the whole world is in crisis with many wars happening. And I believe that our demographic dividend is also in the positive, although we should be careful because I think in the South, it's already gone. And in the next 10, 15, 20 years in the North also it'll gone. So against that backdrop, we have this great ambition, which is the largest nation building exercise ever attempted in human history, which we are about to undertake, and you're all part of it. Some of us will live to see the end of that day, and some of the generations will take it forward. This Viksit Bharat की यात्रा अमृत काल में बहुत महत्वपूर्ण विषय है जिसके ऊपर हम सबको मंथन करना पड़ेगा. And for that, I think we require a different basis for a philosophy. And one of the things my book talks about is that this new philosophy, this new modernity will emerge from the middle. It will not come from the colonial, over industrialized urban areas of this country, which by the way constitute a relatively small percentage of our population. It'll probably also not emerge from the 400 million people who are very poor. It'll emerge from the emerging middle class, which is 800 million people. This should not be confused with the emerging class, with the middle class. This is the emerging middle class, which lives in tier 2 and tier 3 districts like my constituency, where the tentacles of colonialism probably did not make its impact, where culture is still intact, where there is an aspiration to do something for this great nation. And I think this is where a new modernity is emerging. A new modernity, which is not defined by what the West gave us. A new modernity, which is not what socialism gave us or what was defined by Western Europe at some point in time. A new modernity which is in sync with our own culture, which makes sure that every person realizes that there is a potential within them and that human flourishing has to be the essence of Viksit Bharat. So this is what I'd like to invite you to, that this new modernity and how does that define where we should take humanist economics and therefore humanist AI. And this new modernity is defined by our ancient civilizational history. And that starts way back when Greek philosophy talked about mind over matter. I think, therefore I am. Whereas our philosophy also always said, Aham Brahmasmi. I am part of an integrated whole. I am not different. My relationships define myself. And therefore, integration and innovation were the two ends of our civilization energy. And for the longest time, that was forgotten. And this was, of course, amplified in many ways by Christian theology, where God was gave man the rights of conquest over nature, and thereafter it was reinforced by Cartesian philosophy, where essentially man or nature became an automaton. And if you want to read more about it, you must read Amitabh Ghosh's beautiful book, Netmak's Curse and Other Parables, where he talks about how, after Cartesian philosophy, essentially colonialism took its face. The विकराल रूप जो colonialism जो एक तरह से संप्रदायवाद उस समय जो उन्होंने लिया, उसके होते होते इंडोनेशिया पे कॉन्क्वेस्ट हुआ, भारत पे कॉन्क्वेस्ट हुआ, अफ्रीका पे कॉन्क्वेस्ट हुआ. तो इसके पीछे जो गोपनीय चीज है वो उसकी फिलॉसफी है. दैट फिलॉसफी वाज अबाउट एक्सप्लॉयटेशन, इट वाज अबाउट एक्सट्रैक्शन, it was about making sure that you go to a place like Indonesia, you conquer the Banda Islands, you make sure the nutmegs were there. There was no real belief that there is humanism, which is that there is a certain amount of spirit which every human being and every part of nature has. This is where our philosophy differs. This is where the emerging middle class, if you come to my constituency, you will find this banyan tree. This banyan tree has been exemplified in the Linnean system of catalogs. Linnean system was catalogued every plant on this whole world so that they could say this is Ficus benelis. What they don't realize is that 300-year-old banyan tree carries so many stories. This has seen the village. This comes from my own village. I come from a place called Barpar, Bad ke Par. Barpar का जो एक स्टोरी है, उसकी किस्से कहानियां हैं, उसकी जो संस्कृति है, उसकी जो आभा है, वो इसमें निहित है. अगर उसको आप नहीं संभालेंगे तो आप इस ट्री को फिकस बेनलीस करके काट देंगे. मैं आपको दिलचस्प बात बताता हूँ. करीब एक हफ्ते पहले आंधी आई, इसकी एक डाली टूट गई. थोड़ी बड़ी डाली थी, टूट गई. हम गए वहां पर देखने के लिए. कोई भी व्यक्ति उसको काटने के लिए तैयार नहीं है, क्योंकि बरगद को काटना शुभ नहीं माना जाता है. So what I would say is that this is the culture of tier 2, tier 3 districts, where we are still in sync with what I would call an integrative philosophy. And therefore, if we have to create a new modernity, which is how we should power Viksit Bharat, then we must create this modernity out of our own culture. That doesn't mean that Africa doesn't have its own culture. That doesn't mean that Indonesia doesn't have its own culture, but we have forgotten that because essentially North America terraformed all parts of the world in its own image. And again, Amitabh Ghosh's book talks about it, how Western Europe's philosophy, which came from Cartesian philosophy, essentially went out to North America. And I was just there for 2 weeks, and it's a great nation. And I have a lot of love, respect. There's a whole chapter in this book about that. But you need to understand that there are at least 1.4 billion people living in India, with 1/3 the landmass United States, and we still are in sync with nature. The banyan tree is still standing 300 years old because we respect that. Every culture has its own phenomena, so I'm not necessarily here to criticize other cultures. Well, I'm here to celebrate our culture. And I think we shouldn't do it in an andhvishwas sense. We shouldn't say that we don't have many things to do. We must make sure that our modernity is also modernized. We must make parishram of it. ये जो टॉल क्लेम्स हम लोग बोलते हैं कि हमारा इतिहास बहुत गर्वशील था और उसके ऊपर हम लोग बहुत बड़ी चीज़ें कर रहे थे, उससे भी मैं असहमत नहीं हूँ. उससे भी मैं असहमत हूँ. मैं चाहता हूँ कि हम लोग अपनी मॉडर्निटी को एक नई आधुनिकता में परिवर्तित करें. We must make sure that we work hard to create a new modernity which takes our nation forward. And this brings me to my second point, which is around humanist economics. And humanist economics is based on this theory that I have, that the essence of our civilizational mandate is human flourishing. If we cannot allow people to flourish, and that includes nature, then we will not allow this planet to survive. And this is again something that we must teach the whole world, that essentially if we do not flourish and make each other flourish, then we will not be able to take this great nation forward. in an inclusive sense, in an environmentally friendly sense, in a socially relevant sense. And this is where this idea of humanist economics, which is neither big capitalism, which takes capital and makes sure that you assail it, or socialism, which says that everything has to be done by the government. We must make sure that the 1.4 billion people, the 2 million voters and the 3 million people of my constituency flourish, and in so doing, we will create a great nation. How do they flourish? Because we allow them to flourish. We don't hem them in by governmental schemes. I'm part of the government, both the Sarkar and Uttar Pradesh, and in the center is my own, is BJP Sarkar. But I still feel that we do far too much with the government. We don't do enough with our people, and also we do far too much with just deploying capital, which anyways is scarce because all the capital was extracted. When the British came here, we were 20% of the global GDP. When they left, we were 3%. This banyan tree has seen that decline. So I think we need to start examining our theory of economics to say, what is humanist economics? And of course, this is not necessarily a place where I can give you everything, but there are two great thinkers among the 5 or 6 names you mentioned there, including John Rawls. I would want you to add Edmund Phelps and Deendayal Upadhyay. Deendayal Upadhyay talked about integral humanism. He said that we must make sure हमें अपने आप को एकात्म मानववाद से आगे बढ़ाना है. एकात्म मानववाद का अर्थ क्या है? कि हम सब जुड़े हुए हैं, हमारे साथ पर्यावरण भी जुड़ा हुआ है. उन्होंने ये नहीं बोला पर्यावरण अलग है. He said that पर्यावरण is also part of your thing. So how do we bring people together? How do we integrate? What does integration mean? Integration mean what Yoga says. Yoga says our body is not necessarily an automaton. There is a kidney, there is a brain. Or Yoga says that if you actually think about your life, there are many things which are non-material which influence you. And this is what Deendayal Upadhyay ji summarized in 1964 in a series of lectures that he gave. And if you haven't read his books, you must read it. And if you haven't read his books and don't have the patience to read his books, then read mine, because I have given a lot of coverage to integral humanism as to how it has defined this whole theory of how we should take forward. And also Edmund Phelps, whose theory was that human flourishing is not just about making sure that land, labor, capital is multiplied by a factor of productivity. That factor of productivity has something called exogenous innovation, which is what I as an IITian, I'm from IIT Delhi, I as an IITian did in labs. But how do I make sure endogenous innovation, which is what every mother does when she improvises in her drawing room, which is what every karigar does in my village, which is what every kisan does when he has to irrigate his fields when the rains fail. That is also endogenous innovation, and that has to be taken into account. And therefore, while Schumpeter talked about exogenous innovation, Edmund Phelps, who won his Nobel laureate for something else though, has talked about endogenous innovation. And I'd invite you to read his book, Mass Flourishing and Dynamism. He thinks that a dynamic society is not one where you are essentially doing technology in big labs. A dynamic society is where you get every person to think dynamically, and the forces of production come from the 1.4 billion people, and in my case, the 3 million people in my constituency. So it's very important that we think about these two great thinkers as well in what we're doing. I'll not necessarily bore you with this thing, but what we have got is a theory of change which says that the national narrative for Viksit Bharat has to change with Indian modernity. Humanist and digital AI has to be part of that. Humanist economics, humanist theory of the firm. Theory of the firm today is highly jaundiced. It only talks about big companies. जो हार्वर्ड में पढ़ाते थे वही हम लोग लाके ले. मैं भी उसी के MBA स्कूल से आया हूँ, लेकिन आपने FPO के बारे में किसी सोचा नहीं, किसी ने हमने SHG ग्रुप के बारे में सोचा नहीं, जो हमारे कोऑपरेटिव्स बारे उस पे किसी ने शोध नहीं किया. How do we make sure that we get to those people who are creating the maximum employment and the maximum meaning in the lives of people? And also humanist politics and government. How do we make sure that the government is part of what I call the Jamwant theory? कहाँ रीच पत सुनहन माना, का चुप साध रही बलवाना, पवन तनय बल पवन समाना, बुद्धि विवेक विज्ञान विधाना. When Jamwant sees Hanuman शिथिल, he says, आप उठिए, आपके पास सब चीज है. You have got everything. You have बुद्धि विवेक विज्ञान. Why are you not standing up for yourself? So we need to make sure that a nanny state is not created. We need to make sure that the state is an enabler. And that is the four themes. And of course, humanist, social, and cultural, political paradigm will emerge out of that. We are doing it through two things, one of which I'll describe, Amrit Prayas, as well as the Banyan Revolution, which will take this forward. So let me then cut into the third subject, which is humanist AI. Humanist AI is a process whereby much of what you said in your video holds true. If we want to make sure that this planet succeeds, then the center of technology and digital has to be the ability of AI to create human flourishing. The West is obsessed by intergalactic travel, and power be to Musk and Jeff Bezos. But we, with the largest nation on the planet and the largest democracy to boot, we must make sure that we focus on these 900 million voters and the 1.4 billion people. And they must be in the loop. So we have designed a humanist AI theorem. I won't be able to spend too much time, but there are two levels of this conversation. One of which is, if AI has to be in support of human flourishing, then each person becomes a node of that network, which becomes AI. Therefore, people talk about human in the loop. We are talking about AI in the loop. AI should be in the loop to assist humans to make sure that they realize their full potential. Because the essence of human flourishing is also the derivative of meaning. और आपको जान की खुशी होगी that the word of earth in Sanskrit for physical is the same as earth, which is meaning. जब आप कोई अच्छा काम करते हैं, if you are a good artist, if you are a good clay maker, if you are a good industrialist, if you are a good entrepreneur, of course you get material gains. But that's the hedonistic treadmill we want to get off. What you get is purpose in life. What you get is meaning in life. So earth is important. And without earth, humanity has no meaning. Because if we become automatons, which is what the West thinks, because going by to Cartesian philosophy, they think that people are automatic. They feel they're machines. Not that every Westerner thinks like that, but the source of that philosophy, the source of industrial revolution was that we can automate everything. And today, China has also gone that route because China essentially copycatted what the West said. No, sir, we don't intend to do that in India. We will make sure that the emerging middle class hews to a different definition. And that definition is about making sure that human flourishing is at the center of our effort. And human flourishing will make sure that if every person is the center of economic activity or AI activity, then that person. So if there is a person in my village, मान लीजिए बरारी है, मेरा गांव है, बरपार के करीब 10 किलोमीटर दूर है, वहां का कोई लड़का है जो फास्ट बॉलर होना चाहता है, अगर उसके ऊपर फास्ट बॉलर होने की क्षमता है, तो हम उसको आईआईटी में जाने के लिए प्रोत्साहित ना करें, उसको फास्ट बॉलर बनाएं. कोई महिला है जो कि मूंछ का कुछ करना चाहती है, तो उसको मूंछ के लिए आगे बढ़ाया जाए. So this idea that every person has an innate potential has got missed out in this very top-down Cartesian view that you must hew to one particular person's view, which is what capitalism said and colonialism said. And therefore, we must make sure that this modernity informs a view of the AI which is different. Now, what I have done is I have created a personal platform. It's a commercial platform called Jamwant. I won't talk too much about it. We are working in stealth mode. And for the last 9 months, I've been working on this with an engineer. We're now trying to see if we can get it more towards the smaller enterprises so human flourishing can happen. But more to your center, which you've just inaugurated. I think human flourishing has to be the center of whatever you're doing. And the way I saw that video was very good. But I would also want to challenge you to make that video to say, what do you do to ensure that human flourishing is at the center of that activity? Right now, you could argue that many things that the government can do can be done better by AI. Fine. But I think how do we make sure that every person is engaged so that they are able to use AI to do more? This is very critical. I've just come back from a meeting of the BJP and I have to go back there again. And we are thinking about our Karyakartas to say, how do they flourish using AI? It's not just to make sure that we send messages to people, but how do we make sure we're there? And I would also say, one of the things I'm an expert in is non-kinetic warfare. I sit on the Defense Committee, as you know. I've also written the National Strategy for Non-Kinetic Warfare 4 years back. And I can tell you, we are under attack constantly using AI with non-state actors coming from the north of our country. So we must be careful that we do not expose ourselves to AI's negative sides as well. And if we are humanist, if we keep AI in the loop as opposed to human in the loop and automate everything, then when everyone is rushing down this alleyway where everything is becoming data center and almost the kind of energy requirement on this planet is increasing tremendously because of data centers, then we would like to use the 1.4 billion people, their cultural energy, their contextual energy. I believe tribal knowledge is very critical. You cannot take away the tribal knowledge of the person who's making mushroom farming in Devariya. He cannot scrape knowledge of the world to say how's mushroom farming done. It has to be contextual to that place. He needs to know where my new manufacturing plant can be. He needs to know where the warehousing can be. Therefore, the use of AI has to be contextual. Let's get away from this idea that everything can be done in the internet world, which is global. We must make sure that local, decentralized work, which is humanistic, which takes nature into account, is part of a humanist AI architecture. I was very inspired yesterday. Interestingly, about 2 years back, after I'd stepped away from my firm. I also wrote the National Space Strategy with Somnath ji, who is the ISRO chairman, and Pavan Gomka ji. And I was very pleased to know yesterday that while, of course, people are planning rockets to Mars, there is a company which is using AI to make sure that we actually get the benefits of space to humanity. This is the use of AI which we must look at. We must make sure, let others do what they have to do in terms of conquering Mars and conquering Moon, but we must make sure that we put the center of humanity, and this is the new message that we can take to the rest of the world. Now, where is this going to happen? Unfortunately, it's not going to happen in the big cities, because the big cities have already opened their hearts to the AI giant, the automaton view of the world. But it will happen in my district. And therefore, the first part of that is Amrit Prayas. This Amrit Prayas is a 5-year, is a 10-year growth strategy, where of course I will not take you to everything, but it's important for me to understand that this is happening at district levels. Go out into those districts. Pavanji has come there. Others in this room have come there. I invite you to those places so you can do what we are trying to do, which is essentially 4 things. We will increase the GDP of my district by about 3.5%, which is 12,000 crores over 10 years. We will make sure there are additional 1.7 million employment outside of agriculture. We will make sure that environment is not damaged. We cannot guarantee that we will make it better, but it's not particularly poor because we come from a rural area. So how do we make sure it's not damaged? And finally, how do we realize human potential, for which I have created a Bargad Amrit Sangathan. Every one of the 1,100 villages of my constituency has a Mangal Senani and a Lakshmi Senani. I'm very happy to say the 25th of July, we will make sure that that's fully announced. And this is to realize the human potential, where we're using AI in this manner. I'll rush you through some of this. There are 6 subjects that we're looking at, all of which could use with AI that your accelerator will be doing. One of which is agriculture. Second is agro-processing clusters. Third is labor-intensive manufacturing. Fourth is making sure that there is tourism, education, hospitals, overseas employment, defense, space, electronics, although a very small part is part of the issue. Then we also having a sustainable township, ISRO ground radar possibility, Kushinagar Airport, and a waterway that we're looking at. And much of this is decentralized. And I was in a very inspiring meeting with some Gram Pradhans and some farmers just 3 days back in my constituency. If you go to my Facebook or my LinkedIn, you'll find that video. It was a very inspiring meeting, again, under a people tree. We issued a tent, and this is how we want to work with nature, work with humanity. So these values are ensconced in everything that we do. And of course, this can be taken to 10 other districts around that area, which is where Swavalambi Bharat Abhiyan, which is a very big prakalp of RSS, which I'm working very closely with. We have got these 10 districts. We are doing entrepreneurship in this, and this is where we are going to spread the message of Amrit Prayas to these 10 districts. 10 districts, 36 million people, which is half the population of Gujarat. So when you talk about UP and you talk about 240 million people, you need to make difference in a regional sense. You cannot do a strategy even for Uttar Pradesh, which is uniform. You have to make sure it's regional. This is why I was so pleased to see that Yogi ji not only came to my constituency 3 days back, he also came to my house so that he could wish my father just 3 days back. And I think I was discussing Amrit Prayas with him, and he's very, very happy that every time I go and meet him, I talk about development. How does Viksit Uttar Pradesh happen? Through Viksit Devariya. Unless we take a district the size of Qatar, it is the population of Qatar and the geography of Qatar, about 75 kilometers north and south, 100 kilometers left and right. We cannot make this nation go forward. And these 10 districts will, of course, scale that up. And I'd invite CSBC to use this as a Prayogshala. All of you to use this as a Prayogshala. You will not find a chatak सांसद like me. मेरे जैसा सांसद आपको उत्तर भारत में नहीं मिलेगा. तो आप लोग आइए, मेरे घर में बैठिए, मेरे बरगद के नीचे विश्राम करिए. मैं उसी गांव में रहता हूं, और कुछ समय बिताइए ताकि असली भारत से आप लोगों का साक्षात्कार हो, और उस साक्षात्कार से आपको कुछ मिले, ताकि असली भारत में आप लोग काम करें. And then the pioneer revolution is my last penultimate point, which is how do we scale this nationally? There was a green revolution. There was a white revolution. But I would say that the green revolution was informed by a certain amount of fertilizer-led practices. The white revolution, I think, is still continuing, but there's a banyan revolution. How do we inspire thousands of people in districts like Devariya to rise on their own? How do we inspire them, give them an ecosystem? The banyan is also like a giant ecosystem. It has got tendrils sticking out from its root. It's not a uniform system. And this idea that I'm going to put money left and I will have results right is absolutely wrong. We need to make sure that we create ecosystems which enable people, including the environment, to flourish. Human flourishing doesn't happen in a factory, it happens in a garden. So this Banyan Revolution is a national garden we are trying to create. I can tell you one thing, whatever we have done at national and global scales. And after we do India, we will take this to Africa, Indonesia, we'll take it to Latin America, we'll take it to Southeast Asia. Because all those South nations are suffering from what I would call the wounds of colonialism and perspectives which have been imposed on them by the modernity that I've described and critiqued before. So how do we create a new modernity which informs humanist flourishing? And this is where the Banyan Revolution, this is my village, it's still in the construction, but Pavanji has been there. The Banyan, it has an enterprise center. It has economic, social, and cultural manifestations. And essentially, we have got these methodologies, which I'll not bore you with, which is incubation, innovation, inspiration, environment, and ecosystems. And we also have a 7M process by which we inspire our Uddamis to go forward. So you can sense that behind this philosophy, there has to be some kind of very, very structured way of going about this. This is where I think we have to applaud what the West does. It does it in a structured fashion. And therefore, I think we must make sure that that happens. And there are 4 blocks to it. We believe that there are 4 centers like Devariya, one in Kanyakumari, which is an all-time favorite place of mine. All my books, I ending up writing there. Second is Ganjam, after Devariya. Second is Kanyakumari, Ganjam. Third is Nagpur. And fourth is fifth is Middle of Diamond Institute that we would like to create in Mumbai. And of course, we must supplement it by a communication plan, which makes sure that people think of this in different ways. And I'm sure that we can collaborate with your gracious institution to do some of that. And this is also where I'd like to invite all of you to come to my place, but also to the Jagrati Yatra, which every year takes a circle of this great nation, carrying 525 people, 40% are women. And I'll show you a small video at the end of the Q&A. And I'd also say that 50 or 40 people come from overseas. I was in Washington, and I was also in San Francisco, and I met some yatris there. So you can see that the reach of this yatra is national. And I would say that we'll talk about scaling up of this movement in terms of how do we take this district level going forward, and how do we make sure that it's local strength based. We also connect with international markets, and we're also creating essentially a cadre of people who are doing this. And my final point is to invite you to this movement. It's very critical. People like me are quite alone. Our ambitions are great, but we need horsepower. We need human power. We need inspiring people who can join this movement. So as a first point of contact, I'd make 2 requests. First, register for the Jagrati Yatra. Very simple, jagratiyatra.com. And I'll show you a 90-second video, which of course is now 15 years old, but it still shows the essence of the Yatra. It's been going on for 18 years. Even in COVID, we made sure that we did it in those 2 years of COVID. And then come to my constituency. You can know more about it through jcp.in, which is the website of this Jagrati Enterprise Center. If you can become a mentor to local Uddamis, come there and stay a week. If you want to just come there for a few days and see how a member of parliament works, please come there. And therefore, I would invite you to not just be focused on what I would call the top of the diamond, which of course is easier. It also has more resources. To get the kind of money I had for this center that I showed you, I had to convince everyone to say, भाई मैं 36 मिलियन लोगों के लिए काम करने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ. आप मुझे 100 करोड़ नहीं दे सकते यहाँ इसके लिए. You have got all these flourishing institutions in these tier 1 districts and metro districts, which have been made for the last 60 years, 70 years. But 800 million people are residing in places like Devariya. उनके लिए आपने कोई institutions बनाया ही नहीं. Which are the institutions? All are colonial institutions. The district administration, I'm here to tell you, is colonial. Despite the fact that we have tried to reform it. Modi ji and Yogi ji both have tried to reform it. But I think it's about time that create institutions which get the 2 million people of my constituency going. Amrit Prayas, the word Prayas is derived from Pradhan Mantri's very, very impressive phrase, Sabka Prayas. Sabka Vishwas, Sabka Vikas तो होता रहेगा. लेकिन जब तक सबका प्रयास नहीं होगा, तब तक सबका विकास नहीं होगा. It is impossible. When we became an independent nation, we were 300 million people. How many Sansad? How many member of parliament? Roughly about 500. Now there are 543. And how many people? 1.4 billion. It's almost impossible for a member of parliament in India, which is the highest representation in the history of our planet. And with the grace of God, Next time that representation will lower down, because we are hoping that 33% women will enter the parliament. But right now, it is almost impossible to have 2 million voters and 3 million constituents and do sensible work unless you involve those people in that nation building process. So yes, it's important that we get everyone to vote every 5 years, but it's equally important that we engage them in humanist economics, which allows human flourishing, which allows people to rise and shine, and that gives meaning to the lives of people. And this Viksit Bharat story is not just of GDP growth. It is not just of growth whereby we can compare ourselves with USA and China. It is also important that it's inclusive. It's also important that we make sure that the people in our great nation find meaning in their lives. And this is the contribution that India can give to the whole world, because we've always been good at one thing, which is understanding the humanist elements, which from our ancient rishis to the modern seers have always done. We shouldn't be over proud and say that that's the end of the work. We have to work more on it, but we should be quietly confident that therein lies the secrets of coming out of this polycrisis. Thank you very much.
वक्त का पहिया घूम रहा, उम्मीदों की ये रेल चल पड़ी। कभी मिलेगी छांव सुकून की, कभी मिलेगी धूप कड़ी। पर पहिए चलते जाएंगे और राही जुड़ते जाएंगे। इस कारवां में कदम बढ़ाते हम देश नया बनाएंगे। देश प्रेम में सीमाएं छोड़ी, भाषा की सब बाधाएं तोड़ी। बिंदु से बिंदु मिलाकर हमने जिंदगी की सारी कड़ियां जोड़ी। कल केरी में देखा हमने शिक्षा और संस्कृति का संगम। बेंगलुरु के उद्यम मेले में देखा युवा शक्ति का दमखम। मदुरै में खुल गई बंद आंखें, देख स्वास्थ्य में संभावनाएं। एक श्री हरिकोटा में गर्वित हुआ मन का हर कोना कोना। ऐतिहासिक क्षण था दुनिया में परचम लहराती इसरो की धरती पर होना। श्री सिटी में देखे हमने विकास के आयाम नए। भूल न पाए खातिरदारी, दिन कितने ही बीत गए। अक्षय पात्र की रसोई ने हमें भूख के मायने बताए। भूखे पेट न भाती शिक्षा, मन में थे ये भाव जगाए। गंजम के आदिवासी गांवों ने बयां की उनके संघर्ष की कहानी। ग्राम विकास से हम लेकर लौटे नए साल के जश्न की रवानी। यूं ही कदम से कदम मिलाएंगे, हम देश नया बनाएंगे। दक्षिण में मुस्कान बिखेरे हम चल पड़े उत्तर की ओर। नालंदा के अवशेषों से गुजरकर देवरिया के गांव में जाकर आजमाए हमने कुछ नए प्रयोग। बरगद के विशाल वृक्ष के नीचे किया संयम और ध्यान का योग। गूंज के आंगन पहुंचे हम, दिल्ली की सर्दी में जाना। राजस्थान की माटी जब छुई, मेजबानी का लुत्फ उठाया। दिखी कठपुतलियां नाचती हुई। सीखा हमने उनसे जो तूफानों से टकराए थे। अब हम जश्न उनकी जीत का मनाएंगे। हम देश नया बनाएंगे, हम देश नया बनाएंगे। दिल में बसाया मध्य भारत को, जिसकी कल्पना कहीं ना कहीं रह गई थी अधूरी। खुद से किया था एक वादा, हम सशक्त बनकर आएंगे। हम देश नया बनाएंगे, हम देश नया बनाएंगे। कल जब राहें बदलेंगी और दूर दूर सब जाएंगे, पर मन में है विश्वास भरे, हर वो दूरी हम मिटाएंगे। मिलकर देखे जो हमने, वो सपने हासिल कर दिखलाएंगे। उद्यम कर बढ़ते जाएंगे, हम देश नया बनाएंगे।